The stagecoach lurched to a stop in front of the dusty Taylor, Montana church, and Willa Zimmerman gripped the worn leather seat so tightly, her knuckles turned white, wondering if she had made the biggest mistake of her life by agreeing to marry a stranger 1,500 miles from the only home she had ever known. The year was 1878, and the late summer heat pressed down on the small frontier town like a heavy blanket. Through the coach window, Willa could see a handful of weathered wooden buildings lining a single main street, mountains rising in the distance like silent sentinels watching over this rough settlement. Everything looked so different from Philadelphia, where cobblestone streets and brick buildings had surrounded her for 22 years. Her hands trembled as she smoothed the wrinkles from her simple gray traveling dress, the one she had worn for nearly a week during the long journey west. "Miss Zimmerman," the driver's voice startled her from her thoughts. "We have arrived. Shall I help you down?" Willa swallowed hard and nodded, unable to trust her voice. Her throat felt dry as sandpaper, and her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird desperate for freedom. The driver opened the door and offered his weathered hand, which she accepted gratefully as she stepped down onto the dirt street. Dust immediately coated her worn boots, and the sun felt impossibly bright after days spent inside the cramped coach. A small crowd had gathered near the church, curious faces turned toward the newest mail-order bride to arrive in Taylor. Willa felt their eyes on her like brands, judging, assessing, wondering if she would survive this harsh land or become another cautionary tale. She had heard the whispers back in Philadelphia about women who went west to marry strangers, women who sometimes disappeared into the vast wilderness, never to be heard from again. "There he is," the driver said, nodding toward a tall figure standing apart from the crowd. Willa followed his gaze and felt her breath catch. Zachary Zane stood in the shadow of the church, his broad-brimmed hat pulled low over his face. Even from a distance, she could see the powerful build of his shoulders, the confident way he held himself despite the tension she sensed in his posture. He wore clean denims and a dark vest over a white shirt, clearly his best clothes, and his boots had been polished to a shine that seemed almost incongruous in this dusty town. As if sensing her attention, he looked up, and their eyes met across the distance. For a moment, the world seemed to stop spinning. His eyes were the color of mountain lakes, a deep blue-green that stood out starkly against his sun-bronzed skin. A neatly trimmed beard covered his strong jaw, and dark hair curled slightly beneath his hat brim. He looked to be perhaps 27 or 28, with the weathered appearance of a man who had spent his life working under the open sky. Zachary began walking toward her with long, purposeful strides, and Willa fought the urge to climb back into the stagecoach and demand the driver take her home. But there was no home to return to. Her father had died 6 months ago, leaving nothing but debts. Her mother had passed when Willa was just a child. The boarding house where she had worked as a seamstress had burned down, taking with it what little savings she had managed to scrape together. The advertisement in the newspaper had seemed like Providence at the time, a rancher in Montana seeking a wife, offering security and a new life. Now, standing in this dusty street with the sun beating down mercilessly and this stranger approaching, Willa wondered if she had simply traded one desperate situation for another that might be far worse. "Miss Zimmerman." Zachary stopped a respectful distance away and removed his hat, revealing thick dark hair that the Montana sun had streaked with lighter shades. Up close, she could see the fine lines around his eyes, marks left by years of squinting into bright sunlight and harsh winds. His face was handsome in a rugged way, all strong angles and weathered planes, but it was his eyes that held her attention. They were kind eyes, she realized with surprise, warm and gentle despite the obvious strength in the rest of him. "I am Zachary Zane. I am glad you arrived safely." The journey must have been difficult. His voice was deeper than she had expected, with a slight drawl that marked him as someone who had spent time in the South before coming to Montana. There was genuine concern in his tone, which helped ease some of the fear that had been building in her chest like storm clouds. "Mr. Zane." Willa managed to keep her voice steady despite her racing heart. "Yes, the journey was quite long. I am pleased to finally arrive." It was a polite lie. She was terrified, exhausted, and questioning every decision that had brought her to this moment. But her mother had taught her that manners mattered, especially when everything else felt uncertain. Zachary seemed to sense her fear because his expression softened. "I imagine you must be feeling overwhelmed right now. I want you to know that I understand if you have doubts. This is a big step, coming all this way to marry someone you have never met. I want to give you my word, Miss Zimmerman, that I will do everything in my power to replace any doubts and fear you are feeling with hope and joy." The sincerity in his voice struck her like a physical blow. She had expected many things from this first meeting, perhaps awkwardness or uncomfortable silence, maybe even disappointment if she did not meet his expectations. What she had not expected was this gentle understanding, this acknowledgement of her feelings, this promise that sounded like a vow. "That is very kind of you to say, Mr. Zane." Willa felt tears prick at the back of her eyes and blinked them away quickly. She would not cry in front of all these strangers. She had promised herself that much at least. "Please call me Zachary. We will be married shortly after all. There is no need for such formality between us." He gestured toward the church, where a man in a simple black suit stood waiting in the doorway. "That is Reverend Matthews. He has agreed to perform the ceremony whenever you are ready. But if you need time, if you want to rest first or perhaps have something to eat and drink, we can wait. There is no rush." Willa looked at the church, then back at Zachary. Every instinct screamed at her to delay, to give herself more time to think, to find a way out of this situation. But where would she go? What would she do? She had exactly $4.37 to her name, not even enough for a ticket back east. And even if she could return to Philadelphia, what awaited her there? More poverty, more struggle, more nights lying awake wondering how she would pay for food and shelter. At least here, with this man who promised to replace her fear with hope, she had a chance at something better. Maybe not love, she was not naive enough to expect that, but perhaps security and companionship. Perhaps, eventually, contentment. "I am ready now," she said, straightening her spine and lifting her chin. "There is no point in delaying what must be done." Something flickered across Zachary's face, an emotion she could not quite name, but it was gone before she could analyze it. He nodded and offered her his arm. After a moment's hesitation, she placed her hand in the crook of his elbow, trying to ignore how solid and warm he felt even through the layers of fabric between them. They walked together toward the church, the small crowd parting to let them pass. Willa could hear whispers following in their wake, speculation about whether this marriage would last, whether the city girl would survive her first winter in Montana, whether Zachary Zane had finally found someone who could handle life on his ranch. The church interior was blessedly cool and dim after the harsh sunlight outside. Simple wooden pews lined either side of a center aisle, and a plain wooden cross hung on the wall behind the altar. Reverend Matthews smiled warmly as they approached, his weathered face creasing into deep lines that spoke of many years spent ministering to this frontier community. "Miss Zimmerman, Mr. Zane, welcome. Shall we begin?" The ceremony passed in a blur. Willa heard herself repeating vows she barely comprehended. felt Zachary slip a simple gold band onto her finger, heard the reverend pronounce them husband and wife. When Zachary leaned down to kiss her, she tensed automatically, but his lips merely brushed against her cheek in a gesture so gentle and respectful that she felt her fear ease just slightly. "There is a small gathering at the hotel dining room," Zachary said quietly as they signed the marriage certificate. His handwriting was surprisingly neat, the letters carefully formed. "Some of the neighbors wanted to welcome you properly. But if you are too tired, I can make our excuses and take you directly to the ranch." Willa considered this. Part of her wanted nothing more than to escape to somewhere private where she could process everything that had just happened. But another part, the part that had helped her survive after her father's death, knew that making a good impression on the community was important. These people would be her neighbors now, her only human contact besides Zachary for miles around. "I would like to attend the gathering," she said. "It is kind of everyone to go to such trouble." Zachary's expression brightened. "They are good people, most of them. A bit rough around the edges, as you might expect in a place like this, but their hearts are true. They will be glad to meet you properly." The hotel was just across the street, a two-story wooden structure that looked like it had been built hastily, and added onto even more hastily as the town grew. The dining room occupied most of the ground floor, with tables pushed together to create one long surface covered in mismatched dishes filled with food. The sight of so much food made Willa's stomach growl audibly, reminding her that she had barely eaten during the final days of her journey, too nervous to keep anything down. "Come, you must be starving." Zachary guided her toward the table with a gentle hand at the small of her back. "Martha Henderson makes the best fried chicken in the territory, and I believe that is her apple pie on the end there." A plump woman with graying hair and a warm smile bustled over to them, wiping her hands on her apron. "So, you are the brave girl who has agreed to take on Zachary Zane." "I am Martha Henderson, and I run the general store with my husband, Tom. If you need anything at all, anything, you come see me, you hear." The genuine warmth in Martha's voice helped ease more of the tension that had been coiling in Willa's chest. "Thank you, Mrs. Henderson." "That is very kind of you." "Nonsense. We look after our own here in Taylor. Now come, sit, eat. You look like you have not had a decent meal in weeks." The next hour passed in a whirlwind of introductions. Willa met Tom Henderson, a quiet man with kind eyes who clearly adored his wife. She met the town doctor, Samuel Preston, a middle-aged bachelor who welcomed her with professional courtesy. She met ranchers and their wives, the saloon owner, the livery stable operator, and a dozen other faces that immediately blurred together in her exhausted mind. Through it all, Zachary remained at her side, a steady presence that helped anchor her in this sea of newness. He seemed to sense when she was becoming overwhelmed and would smoothly redirect conversations or provide her with a moment to catch her breath. Several times, she caught him watching her with an expression she could not quite read, something thoughtful and almost tender. Finally, as the sun began its descent toward the mountains, Zachary leaned close and murmured, "Are you ready to see your new home?" Relief flooded through her. "Yes, please." They said their goodbyes, collecting well wishes and promises of future visits. Martha pressed a basket of food into Willa's hands. "For your journey home and your first few days, I will not have you going hungry while you get settled." Outside, Zachary helped her into a sturdy wagon pulled by two strong horses. Her trunk and carpet bag had already been loaded in the back. As Zachary climbed up beside her and took the reins, Willa realized with a start that they were truly alone together now, heading toward a home she had never seen to begin a life with a man she had met mere hours ago. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, As Zachary guided the horses down the main street and out onto a dirt road that wound through rolling grasslands, Willa felt an unexpected sense of calm settling over her. Perhaps it was exhaustion finally catching up with her. Or perhaps it was the way Zachary handled the horses with such easy competence, the way he pointed out landmarks as they drove, his voice low and pleasant as he explained where the property lines ran and which neighbors were closest. "The ranch is about 8 miles from town," he said. "I know that seems far, but in winter especially, you will be glad for the distance. Town can get a bit rowdy when the cowboys come in from the bigger ranches to the south. Out at our place, it is peaceful, quiet. Some people find it too quiet, but I have always appreciated the solitude." "I think I will appreciate it as well," Willa said honestly. "Philadelphia was very loud, very crowded. I often wished for space and silence." Zachary glanced at her, surprise evident on his face. "That is good to hear. I worried you might find ranch life too isolated after living in a city. What made you decide to seek a wife from so far away?" The question escaped before Willa could stop it. Surely there must be women in Montana who would have been interested. He was quiet for a long moment, long enough that Willa began to regret asking. Then he sighed, a sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep inside. "There are not many unmarried women in these parts, and those who are available are usually quite young, 17 or 18. I wanted a wife who had lived enough life to understand what she was choosing, someone who came to this marriage with her eyes open. The young girls, they have romantic notions about ranch life, about what it means to be married. I did not want someone who would be disappointed when reality did not match her dreams." The honesty in his answer surprised her. "And you think I understand what I am choosing? I think you have faced hardship. Your letters mentioned losing your father, losing your job. You understand that life can be difficult, that sometimes we must make practical choices rather than following our hearts. I respect that. I respect you for being willing to take this chance." Willa felt something warm unfurl in her chest. No one had said they respected her in a very long time. "Your letters were very honest about what life on a ranch would be like. I appreciated that. Many men seeking wives through the mail paint unrealistic pictures, making promises they cannot keep. I promised you honesty, and I meant it. I will always be honest with you, Willa. I hope you will do the same with me." "I will try," she said softly. They rode in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the steady clip-clop of the horses' hooves and the creak of the wagon wheels. The landscape around them was breathtaking in its vastness. Willa had never seen so much open space, such an endless expanse of sky. The mountains in the distance were painted gold and purple by the setting sun, and the grasslands seemed to ripple like a great green ocean in the evening breeze. "There," Zachary said, pointing ahead. "That is home." Willa followed his gesture and saw a house tucked into a small valley, protected from the worst winds by a rise of land to the north. It was larger than she had expected, a sturdy 2-story structure made of logs that had weathered to a soft gray. A covered porch wrapped around the front, and smoke rose from a stone chimney. Behind the house, she could see a barn, a chicken coop, and several other outbuildings. A stream glinted silver in the fading light, running along one edge of the property. "It is beautiful," she breathed, and meant it. The house looked solid and well-maintained, a real home rather than just a shelter against the elements. Zachary's face lit up with obvious pleasure at her reaction. "I have been working on it for 5 years now, ever since I settled this land. It is not fancy, but it is sturdy and warm in winter, cool in summer. I built most of it myself, with some help from neighbors for the heavy work." As they drew closer, Willa could see more details. The porch railings were carved with simple but elegant designs, and flower boxes sat beneath the windows, though they were empty now at the end of summer. The door was painted a cheerful red, bright against the gray logs. Zachary pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house and climbed down, then came around to help Willa descend. This time, when his hands closed around her waist to lift her down, she did not flinch. He set her gently on the ground and stepped back immediately, respecting her space. "Let me show you around before it gets too dark," he said, picking up her carpet bag. "I will get your trunk inside later." The interior of the house was even more impressive than the exterior. The front door opened directly into a large main room that served as both kitchen and living space. A massive stone fireplace dominated one wall, with comfortable-looking chairs arranged in front of it. The kitchen area was well organized, with a modern cast-iron stove, a deep sink with a hand pump, and shelves lined with dishes and cooking supplies. The floor was made of smooth wooden planks, worn soft with use but clean and well-maintained. "Upstairs are 2 bedrooms," Zachary said, his voice suddenly careful and formal. "I have been using the larger one, but I prepared the smaller room for you. I thought you might prefer your own space, at least until we get to know each other better. There is no rush for anything, Willa. We are married legally, yes, but I do not expect you to be a wife in all ways immediately. I want you to feel comfortable here, to feel safe." The relief that washed over Willa was so intense she felt dizzy. She had been dreading this moment, had spent the entire journey west wondering what he would expect of her on their wedding night. The thought of being intimate with a stranger had terrified her more than anything else about this arrangement. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for understanding. Come, let me show you your room." He led her up a narrow staircase to the second floor. The first door opened onto a spacious bedroom with a large bed covered in a beautiful quilt, a dresser, a washstand, and a chair by the window. Clearly his room, marked by the masculine simplicity of the furnishings and the work clothes folded neatly on the chair. The second door revealed a smaller but still comfortable room. A single bed covered in a different quilt occupied one wall, a dresser stood against another, and a small table with a mirror sat beneath the window. The window itself looked out over the valley, offering a view that must be spectacular in daylight. "I hope it will suit you," Zachary said, setting her carpet bag on the bed. "If there is anything you need, anything you want to change, just tell me. I want you to feel like this is your home, not just my house where you happen to live." Willa walked to the window, running her fingers along the smooth wood of the sill. Everything was clean, dust-free, clearly prepared with care for her arrival. "It is perfect," she said honestly. "More than I expected. I will let you rest and freshen up. I need to tend the horses and check on the livestock. There is fresh water in the pitcher on the washstand, and I set out some soap and towels. When you are ready, come down and we can have some of the food Martha sent." "You must be exhausted." After he left, closing the door softly behind him, Willa sank down on the bed and let herself truly feel everything she had been holding back all day. Tears came then, silent and hot, sliding down her cheeks as the enormity of what she had done washed over her. She was married to a stranger, 1,500 miles from everything she had ever known, in a land so vast and wild it made her feel impossibly small. But the tears were not entirely born of fear or regret. There was relief mixed in as well, and something that might have been hope. Zachary had been kind, more than kind. He had understood her fear and had promised to give her time and space. The house was beautiful and well kept, showing a man who took pride in his home and wanted it to be comfortable. The neighbors had been welcoming. The land itself was breathtaking. Perhaps, Willa thought as she wiped her tears away and poured water into the washbasin, Perhaps this had not been a mistake after all. Perhaps this was the beginning of something good. She washed her face and hands, then unpacked a fresh dress from her carpet bag. It felt wonderful to change out of the dusty traveling clothes she had worn for days. She brushed out her long brown hair and rebraided it, securing it in a neat coil at the nape of her neck. Looking at her reflection in the small mirror, she saw a woman who looked tired and uncertain but also determined. She had survived losing both parents, losing her home, losing everything familiar. She could survive this too. More than survive, perhaps. Perhaps she could even thrive. When she descended the stairs, she found Zachary in the kitchen, slicing bread and setting out the food Martha had sent. He had removed his vest and rolled up his shirt sleeves, revealing forearms tanned dark by the sun and corded with muscle. He looked up as she entered and smiled, a genuine expression that softened his whole face. "Please sit. You must be starving." They ate together at the sturdy kitchen table, the meal punctuated by tentative conversation. Zachary asked about her journey, and Willa found herself telling him about the endless days on the train, the dusty stagecoach ride, the vast landscapes that had amazed her. He told her about the ranch, about the small herd of cattle he was building, about his hopes for the future. "I am not a wealthy man," he said frankly, "but the land is good and I work hard. In a few years, with luck and good weather, the ranch could be quite profitable. I have saved enough to get us through the winter comfortably, and we grow most of our own food. You will not lack for necessities, though luxuries may be scarce." "I am not accustomed to luxuries," Willa assured him. "My family was never wealthy, and after my father died, I learned to live on very little. I know how to make do. That is a valuable skill out here. Montana territory can be harsh, unforgiving, but it can also be beautiful, rewarding. I hope you will come to love it as I do." As the evening deepened into night, Willa felt her exhaustion catching up with her. She tried to stifle a yawn and failed, and Zachary immediately stood. "You should rest. It has been an impossibly long day for you. I will clean up here." "I can help," Willa protested, starting to rise, but he waved her back down. "Not tonight. Tonight you rest. Tomorrow we can begin establishing our routines and dividing the work. But tonight, you have done enough simply by getting here and trusting me enough to go through with the marriage. Sleep well, Willa." The use of her first name, so natural and warm in his voice, made something flutter in her chest. "Good night, Zachary, and thank you for everything, for being kind." His expression grew serious. "You do not need to thank me for basic decency and kindness. That is the bare minimum of what you deserve, what any person deserves. I hope to give you much more than that in time." Willa went upstairs feeling oddly hopeful, a sensation so unfamiliar she hardly recognized it at first. She changed into her nightgown and climbed into the comfortable bed, sinking into the feather mattress with a sigh of relief. Through the window, she could see stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet, more stars than she had ever seen in Philadelphia, where city lights had always dimmed them. As she drifted off to sleep, she thought about Zachary's promise to replace her doubts and fear with hope and joy. It had seemed like an impossible promise when he first made it, the kind of thing people say without meaning. But now, lying in this comfortable bed in this solid house with a full stomach and the memory of his kindness, Willa thought perhaps it was not impossible after all. The sound of someone moving around downstairs woke Willa before dawn. For a moment she could not remember where she was and panic seized her. Then memory returned in a rush. Montana, the marriage, Zachary. She lay still, listening to the quiet sounds of someone starting a fire in the stove, the clink of cookware, the soft thud of boots on the wooden floor. Pale gray light was just beginning to seep through the window. Willa rose and dressed quickly, braiding her hair and splashing cold water on her face to chase away the last cobwebs of sleep. When she descended the stairs, she found Zachary already dressed for the day in work clothes, stirring something in a pot on the stove. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, surprise evident on his face. "You are up early. I tried to be quiet so you could sleep." "I am accustomed to rising early. At the boarding house, I often worked before dawn to finish sewing projects." Willa moved toward the stove, curious. "What are you making?" "Just some oatmeal. I am not much of a cook, I am afraid." "My meals tend toward the simple and practical rather than the delicious." He said it with a self-deprecating smile that Willa found endearing. "I can cook," she offered. "Not fancy things, but good solid food. My mother taught me before she died, and I have had plenty of practice since." "That would be welcome, truly. But not today. Today you are still settling in, still recovering from your journey. Let me take care of breakfast this morning, and tomorrow we can start fresh with new routines." They ate the simple oatmeal together as the sun rose, painting the valley in shades of gold and rose. Zachary explained his daily routine, the work that needed to be done around the ranch, the rhythm of the seasons and how it affected their lives. "I will need to spend today checking the fence lines and moving some of the cattle to a different pasture," he said. "Normally, I would be gone most of the day for work like that, but I can stay closer to the house if you would prefer. I do not want you to feel abandoned on your first full day here." Willa considered this. Part of her wanted him to stay, wanted to not be alone in this strange new place. But another part, the practical part that had kept her alive and functioning after her father's death, knew that the ranch work could not be neglected, and she needed to prove she could manage on her own. "Go and do your work," she said firmly. "I will be fine. It will give me a chance to explore the house, to begin learning where everything is and how things work here. Just tell me what needs to be done, what chores are mine to handle." Zachary looked at her with something that might have been respect. "The chickens need to be fed and their eggs collected. The coop is behind the house, and the feed is in the barn. There is a vegetable garden on the south side of the house that needs watering and weeding. Beyond that, the house is yours to manage as you see fit. There is flour and yeast if you want to bake bread, though we have enough of what Martha gave us to last a few days. I usually draw water from the well in the morning and evening to fill the kitchen barrel, but I did that already this morning." "I can handle all of that," Willa assured him. He hesitated, then reached out and gently touched her shoulder, a brief contact that sent warmth spreading through her. "If you need anything, if anything frightens you or concerns you, there is a bell mounted by the back door. Ring it hard, and I will hear it even if I am far out in the pastures. Do not hesitate to use it if you need me." The genuine concern in his voice touched something deep inside Willa. When was the last time anyone had truly worried about her well-being? "I will remember. Now go, do your work. The ranch will not run itself." After Zachary left, riding off on a sturdy bay horse, Willa spent some time simply exploring her new home. In the daylight, she could appreciate more details she had missed the night before. The furniture was all handmade but crafted with obvious skill and care. The kitchen was remarkably well stocked for a bachelor's home, suggesting Zachary had been preparing for her arrival for some time. In the corner of the main room, she found a small bookshelf holding a dozen well-worn volumes, agricultural guides, a few novels, a Bible, and surprisingly, a book of poetry. The discovery of the poetry book pleased her enormously. It suggested depths to Zachary that she had not expected, a thoughtfulness and appreciation for beauty that contradicted the rough frontier rancher stereotype. Outside, the morning was already growing warm. Willa found the chicken coop without difficulty, and spent a pleasant half-hour feeding the birds and collecting eggs. There were 14 chickens in total, fat, healthy birds that clucked contentedly as they pecked at their feed. She found 7 eggs, still warm, which she carefully carried back to the house in her apron. The vegetable garden was larger than she had anticipated, easily 20 feet by 30 feet, carefully fenced to keep out foraging animals. Tomatoes grew heavy on their vines, and she could see squash, beans, carrots, and several other vegetables in various stages of growth. Someone, clearly Zachary, had been tending this garden faithfully despite having no wife to cook the produce. The sight of it, the evidence of his preparation and care, made her throat tight with emotion. She spent the rest of the morning weeding and watering the garden, losing herself in the simple, meditative work. The sun grew hot on her shoulders, and she was grateful for the bonnet she had thought to wear. Birds sang in the nearby trees, and a light breeze carried the scent of grass and wildflowers. The silence, broken only by natural sounds, was profound after years of city noise. By midday, Willa had worked up an appetite. She went inside and made herself a simple lunch from the remains of Martha's food, then decided to tackle the house properly. It was clear Zachary kept things reasonably clean, but there was still dust in the corners and the windows could use washing. She threw herself into the work, needing the distraction to keep her mind from dwelling too much on her situation. She was upstairs, washing the window in her bedroom, when she saw a rider approaching in the distance. Her heart seized with sudden fear. Zachary had ridden south toward the pastures. This rider was coming from the east, and something about the way he sat his horse suggested it was not Zachary. Willa hurried downstairs and stood uncertainly in the doorway, unsure whether to show herself or hide inside. Before she could decide, the rider drew close enough for her to make out details. It was a woman, she realized with relief, wearing men's trousers and a leather vest, her dark hair braided down her back. The woman reined in her horse and dismounted with easy grace, tying the reins to the porch rail before approaching. She was perhaps a few years older than Willa, with sun-darkened skin and sharp, intelligent eyes. "You must be the new Mrs. Zane," the woman said, her voice friendly. "I am Caroline Reynolds. My husband Peter and I have the ranch about 5 miles east of here. I wanted to come by and welcome you properly, though I see you were not at the gathering yesterday." "I was there," Willa said, confusion evident in her voice. Caroline laughed. "Sorry, that came out wrong. I meant I was not there. We were in Helena visiting Peter's mother and just got back late last night. Martha Henderson came by early this morning to tell me all about you, and I decided I had better ride over before you got the wrong idea about frontier hospitality." Willa found herself smiling despite her lingering nervousness. "Would you like to come in? I could make tea." "I would love that. Fair warning, though, I am not much for sitting and chatting about dresses and recipes. I am likely to disappoint you if you are expecting a conventional lady friend." "I am not particularly conventional myself," Willa admitted, leading Caroline inside. "I am afraid I do not know where Zachary keeps the tea." "Top shelf, left side," Caroline said immediately, then grinned at Willa's surprised expression. "Zachary and I have been friends for years. He helped Peter and me when we first settled our land, taught us more than I can say about ranching in Montana. He is a good man, Willa. One of the best I have ever known. You got lucky with him, if you do not mind me saying so." The casual confirmation of what Willa had been hoping, that Zachary was truly as decent as he seemed, made relief wash through her. "I am beginning to realize that," she said softly. Over tea, Caroline told her about life in the area, pointing out potential challenges and offering advice. She explained how harsh the winters could be, how important it was to lay in supplies before the first snow. She talked about the other families in the area, who was friendly and who to be wary of. She offered to help Willa learn to ride properly, since walking everywhere was impractical when distances were measured in miles rather than blocks. "The isolation is the hardest part," Caroline said frankly, "especially in winter when the weather can trap you inside for days at a time. You and Zachary will need to learn to get along well, to be friends as well as spouses, or you will both go mad. But Zachary is easy to talk to once you get past his quiet exterior. He is thoughtful, considerate, and he has wanted a wife for a long time, not just someone to cook and clean, but a true partner. I think he will work hard to make you happy if you give him the chance." "You seem to know him very well," Willa observed. Caroline smiled, a slightly sad expression. "Zachary was in love with my sister, Ruth, years ago, before he came to Montana. She chose to marry someone else, someone wealthier, more socially prominent. It broke Zachary's heart and he came west to start over. But he and I stayed friends, and when Peter and I decided to homestead out here, Zachary was the one who convinced us to settle nearby. He has never spoken ill of Ruth, never let that old hurt make him bitter. He just focused on building his ranch, creating the life he wanted. He deserves happiness, and I hope you can give that to him." The revelation that Zachary had loved and lost before made Willa see him in a new light. It explained the sadness she sometimes glimpsed in his eyes, the careful way he approached emotion. It also made his kindness to her, a stranger he had married for practical reasons, even more remarkable. "I will try," Willa said honestly. "I cannot promise to be the wife he might have dreamed of, but I will try to be a good partner to him." "That is all anyone can ask," Caroline said warmly. "Now, let me tell you about the time Zachary tried to break a wild Mustang and ended up in Martha Henderson's rain barrel." By the time Zachary returned as the sun was setting, Willa was laughing more than she had in months. Caroline had stayed for hours, regaling her with stories about life in Montana, and clearly assessing whether the new bride would be able to handle the challenges ahead. Apparently, Willa passed whatever test Caroline had been administering, because when she finally left, she pulled Willa into a quick hug and said, "You are going to be fine. And if you need anything at all, you ride over to our place, or send Zachary for me. Women need other women out here, especially at first." Zachary found Willa in the kitchen, humming softly as she prepared dinner. She had found a chicken in the cold room beneath the house and was frying it in a skillet while potatoes boiled on the stove. The domesticity of the scene, the sight of her moving comfortably around his kitchen, did something strange to Zachary's chest. "Something smells wonderful," he said, and she turned with a smile that took his breath away. "Caroline Reynolds visited today. She told me you tried to hide the good skillet from me, but she knew where you had stashed it." Zachary laughed, setting his hat on a peg by the door. "I should have known Caroline would undo all my carefully maintained mysteries. Did she terrify you with stories about Montana winters?" "Only a little. Mostly she told me about you falling in rain barrels and accidentally proposing to Martha Henderson's cow." "That cow story is wildly exaggerated," Zachary protested, washing his hands at the sink. "I was delirious with fever, and the cow was very understanding about the whole mix-up." The easy banter surprised them both. After only 2 days, they were already falling into a comfortable rhythm, the awkwardness of strangers beginning to fade. Over dinner, Zachary told her about his day, about the fence that needed mending and the calf that had gotten itself stuck in a ravine. Willa told him about her exploration of the house and garden, about Caroline's visit, and the plans they had made for Caroline to come back in a few days and begin teaching Willa to ride. "That is good," Zachary said. "You will need to know how to ride. Walking everywhere is not practical out here, and I want you to be able to reach help if something happens when I am far from the house." Caroline said you taught her and Peter most of what they know about ranching. Zachary looked uncomfortable with the praise. "I just helped them avoid some of the mistakes I made when I first started. Learning by trial and error is expensive and sometimes dangerous. Better to learn from someone else's errors when you can." She also told me about Ruth. The words hung in the air between them. Zachary went very still, his fork halfway to his mouth. "Did she?" "I am sorry someone hurt you like that," Willa said softly. "And I want you to know that I do not expect you to love me. I know this marriage was arranged for practical reasons, but I hope we can be friends, partners." "I think that would be enough. More than enough, really." Zachary set down his fork and looked at her directly, his blue-green eyes intense. "What happened with Ruth was a long time ago. I am not the same man I was then, and I have made my peace with it. As for this marriage, I did not enter into it lightly, Willa. I chose you specifically after reading your letters, after feeling like I understood something of who you are as a person. I do not expect love immediately, no. But I hope that over time, we might build something real. Something that could grow into love if we are both willing." The honesty in his voice made Willa's heart race. "I would like that," she whispered. "Very much. Then we will work toward it, together. No rush, no pressure, just two people trying to build a life and seeing what develops." He reached across the table and extended his hand. After a moment, Willa placed her hand in his. His grip was warm and strong, and the calluses on his palm spoke of years of hard work. They sat like that for a moment, hands joined, a promise being made without words. The days began to fall into a pattern. Zachary would rise before dawn and handle the first round of ranch work while Willa prepared breakfast. They would eat together, talking about the day ahead, before Zachary headed out to handle the heavier work. Willa would spend her mornings tending the chickens and garden, managing the house, and learning all the skills she needed to thrive in this new life. Caroline proved to be a wonderful friend and teacher. She came by regularly, sometimes bringing her husband Peter, a quiet man with a quick smile who clearly adored his outspoken wife. Caroline taught Willa to ride, first on an old gentle mare named Daisy, then gradually introducing her to more spirited horses. She showed Willa how to shoot, insisting that every woman in Montana needed to know how to handle a rifle for protection and hunting. She taught her which plants were edible and which were poisonous, how to read the weather in the sky, how to preserve food for the long winter ahead. Through it all, Willa and Zachary grew closer. They talked for hours in the evenings, sharing stories from their pasts, discussing their hopes for the future. Zachary told her about growing up in Missouri, about working on his family's farm until both parents died in a cholera outbreak when he was 20. He told her about Ruth, though briefly, making it clear that the past was truly past. He talked about his dreams for the ranch, about wanting to build something lasting that could support a family. Willa told him about her childhood in Philadelphia, about her mother's death when Willa was 9, about trying to help her father who had never quite recovered from losing his wife. She talked about the boarding house, about the women she had sewn for, about the fear and desperation she had felt when everything fell apart. "I felt like I was drowning," she admitted one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Every day the water rose a little higher, and I could not find anything solid to hold on to. When I saw your advertisement, it felt like someone was throwing me a rope. I grabbed on without really thinking about where that rope might lead." "And now," Zachary asked quietly, "do you regret grabbing on?" Willa thought about the question seriously. looking out at the valley painted gold by the dying light, thinking about the comfortable house behind them, the full larder, the new friends she was making, and most of all, the man sitting beside her who had proven to be everything she could have hoped for and more. "No," she said finally, certainly. "No, I do not regret it at all. This is not the life I imagined for myself, but it is a good life, better than I expected. And you are a better man than I ever hoped to find." Zachary turned to look at her, and the expression on his face made her breath catch. It was open, vulnerable, full of hope and something deeper that she was not quite ready to name. "You are extraordinary," he said softly. "The way you have adapted, the way you have thrown yourself into this life without complaint, the way you have made this house feel like a home. You are braver and stronger than you give yourself credit for." "I am terrified most of the time," Willa admitted with a shaky laugh. "Being brave does not mean not being afraid. It means acting despite the fear, and you do that every day." He reached over and took her hand, a gesture that had become natural between them. "I am glad you are here, Willa, truly glad." "So am I," she whispered. As September turned into October, the air grew crisp, and the leaves on the cottonwood trees along the stream turned brilliant shades of gold. Zachary began making preparations for winter, repairing the barn roof, chopping wood to stack against the house, helping Willa preserve vegetables from the garden. They worked side by side, their partnership growing stronger with each passing day. One afternoon, Willa was in the kitchen making preserves when she heard Zachary shouting outside. She rushed to the window and saw him running toward the barn, and her heart seized with fear. She grabbed her rifle, the one Caroline had taught her to use, and ran outside. "What is wrong?" she called. "Mountain lion," Zachary shouted back. "It is after the calves." Willa followed him toward the pasture, her heart pounding. She had heard about mountain lions from Caroline, about how dangerous they could be, how they would kill livestock if given the chance. Ahead, she could see the big cat crouched in the tall grass, its attention fixed on a group of young calves who had wandered away from the main herd. Zachary raised his rifle, but the angle was wrong, the calves too close. If he missed, he could hit one of them. Willa moved without thinking, circling to the left to get a better angle. She had never shot at anything living before, but Caroline's lessons had been thorough. She found her stance, sighted down the barrel, and squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked through the air, and the mountain lion leaped and twisted, then fell. Willa lowered the rifle, her hands shaking violently, unable to quite believe what she had just done. Zachary was beside her in an instant, taking the rifle from her trembling grip. "That was an incredible shot," he said, awe evident in his voice. "You saved those calves, probably saved me from getting injured trying to drive the cat off. Willa, that was remarkable." But Willa could not stop shaking. She had killed something, taken a life. It did not matter that it was necessary, that the mountain lion would have killed their livestock, possibly even attacked them eventually. Her stomach roiled and she turned away, pressing a hand to her mouth. Zachary seemed to understand. He set both rifles aside and gently pulled her into his arms, holding her while she shook. "It is all right," he murmured against her hair. "You did what needed to be done. You protected our livelihood, maybe even saved lives. It is hard the first time, I know. But you were brave and strong, and I am so proud of you." Gradually, the shaking subsided. Willa became aware of how solid Zachary felt, how safe she felt in his arms. This was the first time they had embraced like this, and it felt right in a way that made her eyes sting with unexpected tears. "I did not think I could do it," she whispered against his shoulder. "When Caroline was teaching me, it was just targets. I did not really believe I would ever have to shoot something alive." "You have adapted to this life better than anyone I have ever seen," Zachary said. "In just 2 months, You have become a true Montana woman. You can ride, shoot, handle livestock, preserve food, and a dozen other things. You amaze me every day." Willa pulled back enough to look up at him, and something in his eyes made her heart skip. Before she could think too hard about it, before fear could stop her, she stretched up on her toes and kissed him. For a moment, Zachary froze in surprise. Then his arms tightened around her, and he was kissing her back with a gentleness that made her melt against him. It was nothing like she had imagined, nothing like the perfunctory kiss they had shared at their wedding. This was real, deep, full of weeks of growing feelings that had been building between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Zachary rested his forehead against hers. "I have been wanting to do that for weeks," he admitted, "but I did not want to rush you, did not want you to think I expected anything." "I wanted you to," Willa said. "I have wanted you to, but I was afraid. Everything between us has been so perfect, so comfortable. I did not want to ruin it by moving too fast, by wanting more than you were ready to give." "Willa." He cupped her face in his hands, his calloused thumbs gently stroking her cheeks. "I have been in love with you for weeks now. Maybe since that first day when you stood in the street looking terrified but determined. When you married me despite your fear because you are brave enough to reach for hope even when you are scared. I did not say anything because I wanted you to have time to feel the same, to not feel pressured. But I love you, truly, deeply love you." The words unlocked something in Willa that she had been keeping carefully guarded. "I love you too," she whispered. "I did not want to. I told myself this was just a practical arrangement, that expecting love was foolish. But you made it impossible not to love you. Your kindness, your patience, the way you look at me like I am something precious. How could I not fall in love with you?" They kissed again, longer this time, and when they finally headed back to the house, walking hand in hand, Willa felt like a different person than the frightened woman who had stepped off the stagecoach 2 months ago. That woman had been full of doubt and fear. This woman was full of hope and joy, just as Zachary had promised. That night after dinner, Willa gathered her courage and knocked softly on Zachary's bedroom door. When he opened it, surprise evident on his face, she said simply, "I do not want to sleep alone anymore, not if you do not want me to." His eyes darkened with emotion. "Are you sure?" "There is no rush, Willa. I meant what I said about giving you time. I am sure. I love you and I want to be your wife in every way. I want to start our real life together, not this careful dance we have been doing." Zachary pulled her into the room and kissed her with a passion that had been carefully restrained until now. "I love you," he murmured against her lips. "I will spend every day of the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me." "I could never regret it," Willa promised. "You replaced my doubts and fear with hope and joy, just like you said you would. You kept your promise." The next morning, Willa woke in Zachary's arms, sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of birds singing outside. She felt complete in a way she had never experienced before, like all the scattered pieces of her life had finally clicked into place. Zachary stirred beside her, pulling her closer, and pressed a kiss to her shoulder. "Good morning, my love," he murmured, his voice rough with sleep. "Good morning, my husband," she replied, loving how natural the words felt. They stayed in bed longer than they should have, talking and laughing and stealing kisses like the newlyweds they truly were now. Finally, the demands of the ranch forced them up. There were animals to feed, chores to complete, a life to live. Over breakfast, Zachary said, "We should go into town today. I need to pick up some supplies before winter, and I want to show you off properly as my wife, not just the woman I married, but the woman I love." Willa blushed at the possessive pride in his voice. "I would like that." The trip to Taylor was pleasant, the autumn air crisp and cool as they drove the wagon along the familiar road. When they arrived, Several people called out greetings, and Willa was struck by how much more comfortable she felt now than on that first terrifying day. These people were her neighbors now, her community. Martha Henderson bustled over as soon as she saw them, her round face creasing into a huge smile. "Well, look at you two. I do not need to ask how married life is treating you. I can see it written all over both your faces. Zachary Zane, you are absolutely beaming." "I have reason to beam," Zachary said, slipping his arm around Willa's waist in a gesture that was both possessive and protective. "I married the most wonderful woman in Montana." They spent the day gathering supplies, visiting with neighbors, and enjoying the simple pleasure of being together in public. Several women pulled Willa aside to tell her how glad they were she had come, how happy Zachary looked, how good it was to see the lonely rancher finally finding love. Caroline Reynolds found them at the general store and pulled Willa into a quick hug. "I can see things have progressed nicely," she said with a knowing smile. "About time, too. The way you two were dancing around each other was getting painful to watch. Were we that obvious?" Willa asked, embarrassed. "Only to anyone with eyes, but I am happy for you, both of you. You are good together." On the ride home, as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, Willa leaned against Zachary's shoulder, content and peaceful. "I never imagined I could be this happy," she admitted. "After my father died, after I lost everything, I thought the best I could hope for was survival. But you have given me so much more than that. You have given me a home, a purpose, love. You have given me a real life." Zachary kissed the top of her head. "You gave me the same thing. This house was just a building before you arrived. Now it is a home. My days were just a series of tasks to complete. Now they are full of joy because I get to spend them with you." "You saved me, Willa, as much as I might have saved you." Winter arrived in earnest in early November, with a snowstorm that blanketed the valley in white and trapped them inside for 3 days. But rather than feeling confined, Willa reveled in the enforced intimacy. They spent the days doing small indoor tasks, reading aloud to each other, cooking elaborate meals together, and talking about everything and nothing. The nights were for passion and tenderness, for learning each other's bodies and hearts in the warm cocoon of their bedroom while the wind howled outside. When the snow finally stopped, and Zachary could get out to check on the livestock, Willa accompanied him, bundled in layers of wool and fur. The world had been transformed into something magical, all white and glittering under a brilliant blue sky. Their breath plumed in the frigid air as they worked together to ensure the animals had food and water, breaking ice and distributing hay. "This is the life I dreamed of when I came west," Zachary said as they walked back to the house, their fingers intertwined despite the thick gloves they wore. "But I never really believed I would find it. A good woman to share it with, someone who loved this land and this life as much as I do. Someone who was not afraid of hard work and harsh conditions. Someone who made every day better just by being in it." "I feel the same," Willa said. "I thought I was just looking for security, for a way to survive. I never imagined I would find love, real deep love. The kind of love I read about in books but never really believed existed." As the winter deepened, Willa discovered she was pregnant. The realization came gradually, with subtle changes to her body that took time to recognize. When she finally shared the news with Zachary, he was overcome with emotion, pulling her into his arms and burying his face in her hair while his shoulders shook with happy tears. "A baby," he whispered, awe in his voice. "Our baby. I am going to be a father. And I am going to be a mother." "I am terrified," Willa admitted, "but also so happy. This child will be born out of love, will grow up in this beautiful place with 2 parents who adore each other. What more could any child want? I will take care of you both," Zachary promised fiercely. I will protect you, provide for you, love you both with everything I have." "I know you will," Willa said, touching his face gently. "I have never doubted that for a moment." The winter passed slowly but not unpleasantly. Zachary insisted on doing all the heavy work, barely letting Willa lift anything heavier than a skillet. She would have been annoyed by his overprotectiveness if it had not been so clearly motivated by love and concern. Instead, she focused on sewing baby clothes, knitting blankets, and preparing the house for the new arrival. Caroline visited when the weather allowed, bringing supplies and advice about pregnancy and childbirth. "You are lucky," she said one snowy afternoon as they sat by the fire drinking tea. "Dr. Preston is a good man and has delivered dozens of babies safely. And if the weather is too bad for him to get here in time, I have helped deliver 3 babies myself. You will not be alone." The fear that had been lurking in the back of Willa's mind eased. She had been so worried about the practicalities of giving birth in such an isolated place, far from the doctors and hospitals of Philadelphia. But listening to Caroline, seeing how confident and capable she was, Willa felt her anxiety diminish. Spring arrived with the sudden intensity it always did in Montana, the snow melting rapidly and the valley bursting into bloom almost overnight. Willa's belly had grown round and full, and she moved with the careful waddle of a woman in her final months of pregnancy. Zachary watched her constantly with an expression of such tender love, it sometimes brought tears to her eyes. One evening in late May, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, Willa felt the first sharp pain grip her middle. She gasped, and Zachary was immediately at her side, his face pale with concern. "Is it time?" he asked, his voice tight. "I think so," Willa managed. Zachary moved with swift efficiency, helping her inside and settling her on their bed before riding hard for town to fetch Dr. Preston. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next afternoon. Caroline arrived at some point. Summoned by some neighbor network, Willa was too focused on the pain to understand. She held Willa's hand and wiped her brow, offering encouragement and practical advice in equal measure. Finally, as the sun began to set on the second day, the baby arrived with a lusty wail that filled the house. Dr. Preston placed the squirming infant on Willa's chest, and she looked down through tears at her son, red-faced and perfect. "You have a healthy boy," the doctor announced, smiling widely. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and an excellent set of lungs." Zachary stood frozen beside the bed, staring at his son with an expression of such overwhelming love and wonder that Willa fell in love with him all over again. Finally, hesitantly, he reached out and touched the baby's tiny hand. The infant's fingers immediately curled around his father's finger, and Zachary made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. "He is perfect," Zachary whispered. "You are perfect. God, Willa, you are the strongest, bravest woman I have ever known." They named him Thomas, after Willa's father, and the next weeks passed in a blur of sleepless nights and overwhelming love. Zachary took to fatherhood with the same dedication he brought to everything else, changing diapers without complaint, walking the floor with Thomas when he fussed, watching over both his wife and son with fierce devotion. As summer turned to fall and Thomas grew from a tiny infant to a chubby, smiling baby, Willa often found herself pausing in her daily tasks to simply appreciate her life. This house that had seemed so foreign and frightening when she first arrived was now the center of her world. These mountains and grasslands that had once seemed harsh and alien now represented home and beauty. And the man she had married out of desperation had become the love of her life, her partner in every way. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching Thomas play on a blanket at their feet, Zachary turned to her and said, "You remember what I said to you that first day, when you arrived so frightened and uncertain? You said you would replace my doubts and fear with hope and joy," Willa replied immediately. The words were burned into her memory. "Did I succeed?" he asked, though there was no doubt in his voice, only satisfaction. Willa looked at the valley spread out before them, golden in the setting sun. She looked at her healthy son, babbling happily as he grabbed at his toes. She looked at her husband, the man who had given her everything she had never dared to dream of. "You succeeded beyond my wildest hopes," she said softly. "You gave me a home when I had none, a family when I was alone, love when I thought I would never find it. You replaced my doubts and fear with so much hope and joy that my heart sometimes feels too full to contain it all." Zachary pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, both of them watching their son play as the sun painted the sky in shades of rose and gold. The wind whispered through the grass, carrying the scent of wildflowers and the promise of another beautiful Montana evening. "I love you," Zachary murmured against her hair, "more than I ever thought it was possible to love someone." "I love you too," Willa replied. "Thank you for seeing past the frightened girl who stepped off that stagecoach and believing in the woman she could become. Thank you for giving me time to fall in love with you, even though I think I was halfway there from the moment you made me that promise. Thank you for making all my dreams come true, even the ones I did not know I had." They sat together as the stars began to emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Thomas eventually fell asleep on his blanket, and Zachary carefully picked him up, cradling their son against his chest as they went inside to put him to bed. Later, lying in their bed with Zachary's arms around her, Willa thought about the journey that had brought her here. The grief and fear, the desperate leap of faith, the slow building of trust and love. It had not been easy, but the difficult things rarely were. What mattered was that it had been worth it. Every moment of fear, every doubt, every challenge had been worth it to end up here in this bed with this man, with their child sleeping peacefully in the next room. "What are you thinking about?" Zachary asked sleepily, his breath warm against her neck. "I am thinking about how glad I am that I found your advertisement in the newspaper. I am thinking about how one small piece of paper changed my entire life. I am thinking about how grateful I am that you were looking for a wife, that you chose me out of all the women who must have responded. Actually, you were the only one who responded," Zachary admitted with a quiet laugh. "I placed that advertisement 3 times before I got a single response. When your letter arrived, I thought it was a miracle. And when I read it, when I saw your honesty and courage in every line, I knew you were the one. I do not believe in fate, not really, but I believe we were meant to find each other." "So do I," Willa whispered. "So do I." The years passed with the gentle rhythm of ranch life. Thomas grew into a sturdy toddler with his father's blue-green eyes and his mother's dark hair. 2 years after his birth, a daughter arrived, a tiny thing they named Alice after Zachary's mother. Then 3 years later, another son they called James. The house expanded with the family, Zachary adding rooms as they were needed, each addition planned and built with the same care he had put into the original structure. The ranch prospered too, the cattle herd growing, the land producing well, their reputation for quality livestock spreading throughout Montana and beyond. Caroline and Peter remained close friends, their own family growing at nearly the same pace as Zachary and Willa's. The two families spent holidays together, helped each other through difficult times, celebrated successes and mourned losses. Other families settled nearby over the years, and a small community formed, bound together by the shared challenges of frontier life. On their 10th anniversary, Zachary took Willa back to Taylor for a special celebration. The town had grown significantly since that day she had arrived, so frightened and uncertain. There were more buildings now, more people, more prosperity. But some things remained the same. Martha Henderson still ran the general store, though she moved more slowly now and relied heavily on her grown children to help. Dr. Preston still tended the sick and delivered babies, though his hair had gone completely white. Reverend Matthews still preached on Sundays and performed marriages, baptisms, and funerals as needed. They spent the day visiting friends and conducting business, then had dinner at the hotel, the same place where their wedding celebration had been held a decade earlier. As they ate, Willa looked across the table at her husband and marveled at how little he had changed in 10 years. There were a few more lines around his eyes, a touch of silver in his dark hair, but he was still the handsome, kind man who had promised to replace her fear with hope. "What are you thinking about?" Zachary asked, catching her staring. "I am thinking about how far we have come. 10 years ago I stood in this very room, terrified and uncertain, wondering if I had made a terrible mistake. Now look at us. 3 beautiful children, a thriving ranch, a community of friends, a love that has only grown stronger with time. It seems impossible that so much happiness could come from such a frightening beginning." Zachary reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb tracing the simple gold band he had placed there a decade before. "That day, when you stepped off the stagecoach looking so scared but so brave, I knew my life was about to change. I just did not realize how completely. You have given me everything, Willa. A real family, a real home, a purpose beyond just surviving and working. You have made every day better than the last." "You did the same for me," Willa said, her eyes bright with tears. "You saved me, Zachary. Not just from poverty and loneliness, but from a life without love, without joy, without hope. You gave me everything I never dared to dream of." They returned home the next day to find their children being spoiled thoroughly by Caroline and Peter, who had agreed to watch them. Thomas, now 10, was helping Peter with some ranch work, taking his responsibilities very seriously. Alice, at 8, was helping Caroline make cookies, her face dusted with flour. Little James, just 5, was napping on the sofa, exhausted from playing with the Reynolds' youngest children. As the years continued to unfold, Willa and Zachary grew old together, their love deepening with each passing season. They watched their children grow up, helped them through heartbreaks, and celebrated their successes. Thomas took over more and more of the ranch work as Zachary's back began to ache and his hands grew stiff with arthritis. Alice married a young schoolteacher who came to Taylor and moved into town, though she visited often with her own growing family. James, the youngest, surprised everyone by becoming a lawyer, going east for his education but always returning to Montana, to the mountains and grasslands that were in his blood. On their 30th anniversary, their entire extended family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Children and grandchildren filled the house with noise and laughter, and Willa moved among them with a heart so full of joy she thought it might burst. She found Zachary on the porch, taking a break from the chaos, and settled beside him with a contented sigh. "We did well," she said simply, gesturing toward the house where 3 generations of their family were gathered. "We did very well indeed," Zachary agreed, putting his arm around her shoulders and pulling her close. His hair was completely white now, and his face was deeply lined, but his eyes still held the same kindness and love that had first captivated her so many years ago. "You ever regret it?" Willa asked. "The life you could have had if you had stayed in Missouri, if you had fought harder for Ruth?" Zachary turned to look at her, surprise evident on his weathered face. "Not even for a moment. That life was never meant to be mine. This life, this family, this is what I was always meant to have. Ruth made her choice and I made mine, and I have never once regretted it. How could I, when it brought me everything worth having? I used to have nightmares, Willa admitted quietly. In those first months after I arrived, I would dream that this was not real, that I would wake up back in Philadelphia, still poor and alone and desperate. It took a long time before I truly believed that this life, this happiness, was really mine to keep. And now, Zachary asked, now I know it was all real. Every moment of joy, every challenge we faced together, every year of love and laughter, it was all real and it was all ours. She leaned her head on his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath her ear. You kept your promise, Zachary. You replaced my doubts and fear with hope and joy, and you gave me 30 years of happiness beyond measure. They sat together as the sun set over the mountains, listening to the sounds of their family inside, the legacy they had built together through years of love and hard work. The valley spread out before them, unchanged in its essential beauty despite the passage of time, still wild and harsh and breathtakingly lovely. I love you, Zachary said, the same words he had spoken thousands of times over the past 30 years, but they still had the power to make Willa's heart skip. I love you too, she replied, the same response she had given thousands of times and would give thousands more if fate allowed. As the stars began to emerge and the last light faded from the sky, they went inside together to rejoin their family, hands still clasped, as they had been since that first day when a frightened bride stepped off a stagecoach and a lonely rancher promised to replace her fear with hope. It had been a promise kept, a vow fulfilled, a love that had lasted and would last until their final days and beyond. The house was warm and bright, filled with love and laughter, exactly as Zachary had always dreamed and Willa had never dared to hope. And in that moment, surrounded by the family they had created and the life they had built, both knew with absolute certainty that every moment of doubt, every challenge faced, every fear overcome had been worth it to end up exactly here, exactly now together. Their story became legend in Taylor, Montana. The mail-order bride who arrived with doubts and fear, and the cowboy who promised to replace both with hope and joy. Young couples would sometimes visit them, seeking advice on how to build a marriage that could last decades. Zachary and Willa always gave the same answer: honesty, patience, kindness, and a willingness to work together through whatever challenges life presents. Love is not just a feeling, Zachary would say. It is a choice you make every single day. Choose to be kind even when you are frustrated. Choose to listen even when you want to talk. Choose to forgive even when you have been hurt. Make those choices every day, and the feelings will grow deeper and stronger with time. And remember, Willa would add with a smile, that building a life together is exactly that, building. It takes time and effort and patience. You cannot expect perfection immediately. You have to be willing to work, to compromise, to learn together. But if you are both committed, if you both keep choosing each other and choosing love, you can create something beautiful. They lived to see grandchildren married and great-grandchildren born. They saw Montana transform from territory to state, saw the frontier towns become real cities, saw the wild land they had loved slowly tamed. But their valley remained largely unchanged, still beautiful and harsh and perfect. When Zachary passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 82, Willa mourned deeply, but not hopelessly. They had been granted 54 years together, more than most couples could ever dream of, and almost every day of those years had been filled with love. She knew he had died content, surrounded by family in the house he had built, on the land he had loved. She lived 3 more years, watched over carefully by her children and grandchildren, still sharp and aware despite her advancing age. On quiet evenings, she would sit on the porch and remember, letting the memories wash over her like a warm tide. The fear she had felt stepping off that stagecoach, the kindness in Zachary's eyes when he made his promise, the slow building of trust and love, the joy of their children, the prosperity of their ranch, the depth of love that had sustained them through decades. When her time came, she went peacefully, slipping away in her sleep with a smile on her weathered face, perhaps dreaming of the young cowboy with blue-green eyes who had promised to replace her doubts and fear with hope and joy, a promise he had kept every single day of their life together. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the valley, their graves marked by simple stones that bore their names and the dates of their long lives. But their real legacy was not in stone but in the family they had created, the love they had shared, and the story they left behind. A story of courage and kindness, of fear transformed into hope, of a mail-order bride and a lonely rancher who found in each other everything they had ever needed. And on quiet evenings, when the wind whispered through the grasslands and the mountains turned purple with distance, visitors to that hilltop sometimes claimed they could feel the love still lingering there, a testament to a promise kept and a life well lived. The story of Willa and Zachary Zane became part of the fabric of Montana itself, a reminder that sometimes the greatest love stories begin with the greatest leaps of faith, and that hope and joy can bloom even in the harshest landscapes when tended by kind hearts and willing hands. The ranch continued to thrive under Thomas's careful management, passing eventually to his children, and then their children, each generation honoring the legacy of the couple who had started it all. The house was maintained lovingly, and the room where Willa had first slept, the one Zachary had so carefully prepared for his unknown bride, became a guest room where family members loved to stay, claiming it had the best view and the most peaceful energy. The gold ring Zachary had placed on Willa's finger that day in the church passed to Alice, who gave it to her own daughter, who gave it to hers, each generation hearing the story of the frightened young woman who took a chance on a stranger's promise and found a love that lasted a lifetime. The ring became a symbol of courage and hope, a reminder that sometimes the best things in life come from the scariest decisions. Martha Henderson's great-granddaughter eventually wrote a book about the early settlers of Taylor, and an entire chapter was devoted to Zachary and Willa, their love story captured in loving detail for future generations. The book became popular throughout Montana, and people from all over would visit Taylor to see the church where they were married, the ranch where they built their life, the graves where they rested together. But more than the physical places or the objects left behind, what truly endured was the example they had set. They proved that arranged marriages could become love matches, that practical beginnings could lead to passionate partnerships, that fear and doubt could indeed be replaced with hope and joy when two people committed to building something real together. Their story reminded people that love was not just about grand gestures and sweeping romance, though there had been plenty of that in their years together. It was also about the quiet moments, the daily choices to be kind and patient, the willingness to work side by side through challenges, the commitment to keep choosing each other day after day, year after year. In the end, Willa and Zachary's greatest achievement was not the successful ranch or the large family or the respected place they had held in the community, though those were all significant. Their greatest achievement was the love they had built from nothing, from fear and uncertainty and desperate hope. They had taken a terrifying beginning and transformed it into a beautiful life, proving that sometimes the best endings come from the most frightening beginnings, and that a promise made with sincerity and kept with dedication can change everything. And so their story lived on, told and retold, inspiring couples to take chances on each other, to choose hope over fear, to believe that love could grow even in the most unlikely circumstances. The story of the bride who arrived with doubts and fear, and the cowboy who promised to replace both with hope and joy, a promise that became a life, a legacy, and a love for the ages.